Hi everyone, this is Koinzell here. So I have the Vape 8 weapon comparison video ready at last. For the past 2 weeks, I have been working on all the weapon math for not just the Vape, but for Taser, for forward vape as well, Vape easy. So this week I'll be able to release all of the weapon comparison videos. We'll do it com by com. Okay, so you'll see that we have Aqua Simulacra, Skyward Hub, Elegy For The End, Sacrificial, Favonius, Stringless, Fading Twilight, and Slingshot 8 weapons, like I said, being compared here. So you have 5 star, you have 4 star, you have 3 stars. So these are the damage figures, the DPS figures, along with the percentage comparison. Okay, I'm not going to explain how to read the table until I finish going through the important notes. But if you've watched my math guide on the weapon comparison on the previous new characters, every time prior to the character releasing, I will do some sort of a weapon comparison. So the way to read it is, probably just quickly talk about it here. The way to read it is, for Skyward Hub, this is Aqua versus Skyward Hub. At C0, Aqua is 41.4% better than a Skyward Hub. If you look at the Elegy For The End, you see that there's 2 Rape versus, right? So if it says Aqua versus, it means Aqua versus Elegy For The End. If it says Skyward Hub versus, it means Skyward Hub versus the first weapon on the left that is not in Rape. So likewise for Sacrificial Bow, when you see Elegy here, it means Elegy R1 versus Sacrificial Bow. So in this case, this means that Sacrificial minus 28.3% here means that Sacrificial Bow is 28.3% better than Elegy. Or rather, Elegy is 28.3% worse than Sacrificial Bow. Okay? So generally speaking, this is how you read the table. Not to worry, towards the end of the video, I will provide a view of each of the weapons so that you can pause if required and do your necessary references if you need to. Like for example, if you already plan to get Yelan at C2, then you may want to look only at the C2 figures. And depending on whether you're doing R1 or R5. Alright? Let's look at the important notes. You know what? Let me get the DPS figures here for now. This weapon comparison applies to VVV only. Weapon comparison for other comps like Taser and Vape easy will be done this week as well. ER values matches whatever has been covered in previous math guides, i.e. weapons other than Sacrificial and Favonius will be 250 ER at C0, 190 at E1. At C1. So you know this is pretty standard based on the math guides that we have done so far for VVV. Sacrificial C0 is 190 ER, C1 plus is actually 135 ER. This is something I have not shared before, but I have crunched the numbers, so I can safely say that 135 ER is the value for C1 plus, which is a good thing, because Sacrificial's ER value from the weapon is 30.6, so it's still fully utilized. But for Favonius, C0 is 220 ER, C1 plus is 161.3 ER. It's true, it's really 161.3 ER. So you don't really get to gain the benefit per se. Well, I'll talk more about that later. So 4 emblem is used for 119 ER and above. 2 HOD, 2 TOTM used for below 190 ER. So that would be C1 plus Sacrificial and C1 plus Favonius. Okay. Now R1 of 5 star weapons would be compared against both R1 and R5 of 3 and 4 star weapons, which makes sense, right? Because you know it's much easier to get R5 of a 4 star weapon versus R5 of a 5 star weapon. So naturally we will compare R1 of a 5 star weapon versus R1 and R5. So when you look at the table here for Sacrificial bow figures, the comparison that you see here, this section here, and in fact this entire tree, it is a R5 Sacrificial bow versus a R1 Aqua as denoted here, versus R1 Skyward Hub versus Elegy R1. Okay, so straightforward stuff. Just look whether there's R1 here. If there's R1 here and it's R1 figures here, then you know it's R1 versus R1. If it's R1 here and R5 here, then you know that it's Aqua R1 versus Sacrificial bow R5, for example. Right. The one thing to note is that these DPS figures are Yelan's only, so the impact of Elegy's buff is not reflected in the figures. But I'll address this in the Elegy section below, no worries. So we'll talk about 5-star weapons, Elegy, Sacrificial versus Aqua, Sacrificial versus Favonius, Stringless, Fading Twilight, and Slingshot, which are like full F2P weapons, and we'll do a conclusion where I'll also show the weapon rankings at the 3 major constellation points per se, or rather the 3 constellations where there is some difference, there are changes to the weapon due to how the constellations work. And following that, I'll do a quick breakdown of what's coming next for Yelan video series, because I have a plan to try to do daily videos this week after having spent so much time in the previous 2 weeks doing all the weapon math. Because it's like with 8 weapons, right? 8 weapons is actually 16 word hits because of how her C0 and C1 works, and multiply that by 3 comps. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, without further ado, let us go into the VV Vape 5-star weapons. Now, at all constellations, Aqua is, let me hide this. At all constellations, Aqua is significantly better than Skyward Hub and Elegy. So if you use Elegy, if you look at the Elegy figures, right, that's the easiest right here, right? You'll see that basically Aqua is always better. There are no negative figures here. In fact, the percentage difference that Aqua is better is quite significant. We have 1 typical tier difference to 2 typical tier difference, and that is C1 plus, in fact. Okay, at C1 plus is about 1 tier difference, but when you go to R5 it's almost 2 tiers already. In fact, at C0 it's more than 1 typical tier difference, it's 1.5. I did not mention it here, but yeah, at C0 the difference is even bigger. So you really do lose out on quite a bit of DPS. Okay, but basically, this is also a testament to how good Aqua is even at R1 for Yelan, right? Because it's already 1 tier difference against other 5-star weapons, and 1.5 at C0. However, for Elegy, since it provides party-wide EM and attack buff, we'll talk about it in the next session here. Okay, so Elegy for the End. So, unfortunately, I can't do the math to show exactly the impact of the EM buff to overall team DPS after looking at the days available and video pipeline. It's also a lot more effort involved, and I don't think I can afford to do it. Because if I share with you guys the video series, the timeline, right, and the pipeline, you know why. But it's a fairly straightforward analysis even without math, so I'll provide the pointers or the analysis that I've done. Okay, so the point number 1, this is going to be like a decision roadmap, okay? If your Yelan artifacts are far from optimized but Hu Tao is, Elegy is better than trying to focus on the damage. It's a no-brainer, right? If you're going to give Yelan bad artifacts and Hu Tao good artifacts, then obviously you're better off trying to buff Hu Tao's damage than Yelan's. Okay, but if this is not the case for you, if your Yelan artifacts are pretty optimized like your Hu Tao's, or both of them are at the same level, if your Yelan's artifact are equally well rolled as Hu Tao's, which is what I just said, the next decision point is how much EM your Hu Tao currently has. If your Hu Tao already has 100 EM, which is anyway the recommended amount for a Vape Hu Tao, regardless of from team buffs or own gear, by the way. So if you have something like C2 Kazuha in there, right, you already have 200 EM. Take it that way. Now the 100 EM, if you have this amount of EM or more, the 100 EM from Elegy R1 has a diminishing effect, and Aqua is worth the risk to get, especially if you see the difference to DPS. Alright? Now, if your Hu Tao has 0 EM, it's definitely worth using Elegy. And this is the case especially if you don't have Aqua or Sacrificial, since the other weapons aren't significantly better than Elegy DPS wise. Okay? So for me personally, right, my Hu Tao has 240 plus EM in anticipation of C4 Yelan, which means I'm using an EM sense instead of HP sense, because C4 Yelan will cover that. Plus 200 EM from C2 Kazuha, that's already 440 plus EM, thus Aqua is definitely better for me, but that's for me. Okay, so I kind of fall under 2A. So whether or not you want to use, or rather whether or not Elegy is better for you, really depends on this. But other than that, right, one thing to note is that all of the above is assuming C0 Yelan, by the way. If you're going to invest in C1 or further, then it's worth considering Aqua. Because once you get C1, the value of Aqua increases significantly over all of the other weapons. Which is something that is understandable, right? Because initially Aqua had a better performance against Sacrificial Bow, or rather worse performance against Sacrificial Bow at C0. Once you go into C1, Sacrificial Bow falls off a lot, and it makes more sense to get Aqua then. One last point to consider, if you are using both FS and Elegy together, the effect that happens later will override the earlier if it's the same buff, which will be the attack percentage, because both FS Freedom Swan and Elegy, they both have attack percent buff. So let me give an example here so as to make it clearer. Okay, R5 Freedom Swan and R1 Elegy, since Elegy effect takes longer to proc, it will be the later effect to happen. And what will happen is that if you have R5 Freedom Swan and R1 Elegy, your R1 Elegy's 20% attack bonus will override the 40% attack bonus from other 5 Freedom Sword. Now the NACAPA bonus from Freedom Sword will not be overwritten, because that's different, right? That's a different buff, a different stat. But the attack bonus will. So for me, this is exactly what I have. R5 Freedom Sword with R1 Elegy. So I am better off using R5 Freedom Sword without R1 Elegy, even without considering all this, in my opinion anyway. But but if you guys have something similar like what I have, then yeah, that's one important point to take note of. But I do know that this may be more of a minority issue, but I just want to include this here. Alright? So TLDR, I've talked so much about Elegy, right? Basically, use Elegy only if C0 Yelan and Yelan artifacts not as good as Hood House, and /or Hood House has 0 EM, including team buffs. Otherwise, Aqua or R5 Sacrificial Bow for C0 Yelan. If you have Aqua, you should definitely use it and make sure your Yelan artifacts are optimized. Like, if for some reason you were putting on the weapon banner and you managed to get Aqua, right? Then yeah, you should use the Aqua. Okay. Alright, I hope that's clear for the Elegy for the End. Let me just hide all of these. Okay. Now let's talk about Sacrificial versus Aqua. At C0, Sacrificial Bow is the best performer right after R1 Aqua. Only 1.7% lower than R1 Aqua, because remember we use R5 Sacrificial Bow versus R1 Aqua, so it's only 1.7% behind Aqua. Then it makes sense just to use the R5 Sacrificial Bow, right? If you only intend to keep your Yelan at C0. And I can show you guys, none of the other weapons, they meet Aqua. Their performance is as close to Aqua as Sacrificial is, so this 13.3% behind. Stringless is a whopping 46.6%, and you have Fading Twilight 43.7%, you have Slingshot 37.9%. Okay, so basically, Sacrificial Bow is so good that you don't need to pull for Aqua unless you are at C1 plus above. Especially if you have R3 plus Sacrificial Bow. You don't even need R5 actually. R3 plus is more or less safe enough for your set bow effect to proc. I mean, obviously R5 is definitely the best, but I'm saying that R3 plus is already at the point where it's feasible to use it. This alone makes Yelan very F2P friendly, and I have to say that it's the closest I've ever seen a 4-star perform against a 5-star. Even the Prototype Ember versus Kokomi's Donut is not as close as this. However, this does not mean that Aqua is bad. Okay? It's a unique situation specific only to C0 Yelan in VVV. I can tell you guys right off the bat now that Aqua versus Sacrificial Bow is very different in Taser, the performance. But nevertheless, the fact that there's a comp here with its unique situation that allows R3 plus Sacrificial Bow to only be 1.7% lower than the signature bow is really good for Yelan as in terms of F2P friendliness. Okay, but once you go to C1 plus, Aqua is better than Sacrificial Bow by 22 to 30%, which is a typical tier difference. Which is still good because right now there will be, if you saw the 5-star weapons, even the Skyward High and Elegy are 1 to 2 tier difference behind. You can see Sacrificial does perform better, right? You can see that the Elegy and Skyward High are both 28 to 29% worse than a Sacrificial Bow at C0. So yeah, I'll say Sacrificial Bow is a very great option for her. Alright. Now let's talk about Sacrificial versus Favonius. Now I've already done a math guide for this specifically, so I do encourage you to check that out. Although that really focuses on C0 and I have more information here because of C1 plus, C6, etc. But yeah, do check that out and I'll put it in the video link on top right corner here or in the description. So feel free to check those out, yeah? Okay, so essentially, Sacrificial is 11.2% better than Favonius at C0. Although this gap does decrease significantly at C1+, it goes to 0 to 2%. So what I'm talking about is here, 11.2% or 11.5% if you want to compare R5 versus R5. Okay, now the advantage then drops to, it basically drops to 0 to 2% and it's pretty much the same here. Okay. At C6, however, you do see that Sacrificial Bow does worse than Favonius. And the reason for that is because with the total duration of C6 being the longest, the rotation extension of Sacrificial Bow's third Q finally causes a negative impact where Favonius ends up being better. But it's only at C6. If your Yelan is C0, then it's a no-brainer to use R5 Sacrificial or R3 plus Sacrificial instead of Favonius. Very, very straightforward. Like always, okay, so always remember, the very basic and simple thing to remember is this. Favonius is meant to give more energy to the entire team, whereas Sacrificial is more for the specific character being used, unless you funnel the energy particles to another character. Okay, now let's talk about Stringless. I know Stringless on paper looks pretty good as well for Yelan, given that it increases the skill and burst damage, that's EM. But the EM stat is not that great. Why? Because it doesn't do anything in VVV. Stringless is sadly the worst performer here, even worse than the F2P options like Fading Twilight and Slingshot. Which means out of the 8 weapons that I've compared, Stringless is the worst. Since, like I said, you have one major factor, which is the weapon substat being completely useless in PvP. It's already very bad. And but to be fair, for Taser, where the EM substat will help with damage contribution, it's no longer the worst performer. But I just want to let you guys know that in PvP, it is the worst performer. So just forget about Stringless. You're better off putting Stringless on someone who can benefit a lot more from it, like Fisher or Venti. And these are the Stringless figures. You'll see that there is no weapon that's worse off than Stringless. But that's not fair, right? Because I do have Fading Twilight and what do you call that? Slingshot. So then you can look at here. You see that Stringless is always worse than Fading Twilight, and it's always worse than Slingshot except R5 to R5 here, where the difference is about 1 to 2%. So, oh sorry, wrong column. This is the column to look at. Sorry, my bad. So Stringless is always worse than Slingshot as well. So that's why I say Stringless is the worst performer here. So yeah, don't bother with Stringless at all for Yelan. Now let's talk about the Fading Twilight and Slingshot, which are basically the full F2P weapons. As shared in my previous math guide on Fading Twilight, at C0 you should use R5 Slingshot, since it's 4% better than R5 Fading Twilight. It's very straightforward stuff. I'm making my Fading Twilight at level 1 even with the 1.5x enhancement bonus. That's what I think about that weapon. Okay? Even though I have like 5,000 plus Mystic Ores, I don't want to waste my Mystic Ores on this. Unless even if you see me leveling this weapon to level 90, it will just be for the sake of content. Now at C4 plus, Slingshot overtakes Sacrificial Bow as the second best. Okay, so it's interesting, right? Slingshot at C4 plus, it starts to overtake Sacrificial Bow, which is very interesting result. Because Sacrificial Bow is the second best weapon, but when you go to C4 plus, Slingshot is actually better. Okay, it is to do with the fact that you have higher HP, which means your base damage is higher, so the crit stat from Slingshot has a bigger benefit. Think of it that way. Okay. Alright, now I've already done the analysis done some analysis spotlights for specific weapons that we have done in this comparison. Now let's look at the conclusion and also the overall weapon ranking. I think that will be much more helpful, and I'm sure many folks jump to this section as well, right? Alright, so first off, R1 Aqua is 1 tier difference better than Skyward and Elegy, 27 to 30% at C1+, 41 to 43% better at C0. So in fact at C0 is about 1.5 tier. R5 Aqua is 2 tiers difference better than Skyward and Elegy, 40 to 50% at C1+, 52 to 67% at C0. Wow, in fact if you think about it, 67% is more than 2 tiers. And that's for Elegy, by the way. 52% is Skyward. Okay, so this is R1 Aqua versus Skyward and Elegy. Aqua versus Skyward and Elegy. Next is about Elegy. Okay, use Elegy only if C0 Yelan and Yelan artifacts are not as good as Hu Tao's, and Hu Tao has 0 EM, including team buffs. Otherwise, Aqua or R3 plus Sacrificial both for C0 Yelan. Okay, but obviously you use your Elegy is only a consideration if you have it to begin with. Now, if you have Aqua, for some reason if you have Aqua, you should definitely use it and make sure your Yelan artifacts are optimized. Okay. Next, weapon rankings. This is the most important. I think this is the single most important section of this entire video. Okay. At C0, use R3 plus Sacrificial Bow instead of putting for Aqua, which is only 1.7% better. This applies only in VV Vape. Okay, I really replay this. This applies only in VV Vape. When it comes to Taser, I can tell you that Aqua is a lot better. So it really depends on how you intend to use your Yelan. But anyway, this is the ranking at C0. Aqua is obviously the best, then Sacrificial Bow, although I would say the both of them are more or less equivalent since Aqua is only 1.7% better. R3 plus versus R1 Aqua. So Aqua, Sacrificial Bow, Favonius, Slingshot, Skyward Hub, Elegy, Fading Twilight, Stringless. This is the order in terms of from best to worst. Okay. Now, at C1+, Aqua performs significantly better than Sacrificial Bow. It's a typical tier difference 22 to 30%, but Sacrificial Bow is still the second best, followed by Favonius. So the ranking at C1+ is Aqua Bow, Sacrificial Bow, Favonius, and Elegy instead of Slingshot. You see here at C0 we have Slingshot performing better, then you have Skyward, then Elegy. Now the order has changed. It's a complete mirror of these three weapons, where now Elegy is better than Skyward Hub, and in turn better than Slingshot. Now Fading Twilight and Stringless still remain the worst and second worst weapons, unfortunately. Now at C4+, Slingshot actually overtakes Sacrificial Bow as the second best, and even Skyward Hub and Elegy performs better than Favonius. So the ranking at C4+ will be Aqua, Slingshot, Sacrificial Bow, Skyward Hub, Elegy, Favonius, and Fading Twilight and Stringless. Okay, so yeah, so depending on where your constellation is at, this is for your reference in VV VIPcom itself, which weapon is better. Alright, and remember, R5 we are only comparing R1 of 5-star weapons to R5 of 4-star here. Okay, now I wouldn't recommend Favonius unless you do not have R3 plus Sacrificial Bow, since it's 11.2% worse than R3 plus Sacrificial Bow. At C1+ though, Sacrificial is only 0 to 2% better than Favonius, and Favonius is better at C6 by 2.5%. So once you go C1+ and beyond, it's really up to you whether you want to use Sacrificial or Favonius. 0 to 2% I think is good enough to it's good enough to decide, or rather it's good enough that you can just choose either or. Okay, unless your artifact stats already have a lot of ER, then yeah, you are better off with Sacrificial. But then again, to begin with, I can tell you that the C1+ Favonius ER is a little overkill, whereas Sacrificial is fully utilized. Alright, Stringless and Fading Twilight are not worth considering after completing their math, with Stringless performing even worse than Fading Twilight, a F2P weapon, although this does change in Taser comp. But I can tell, to be honest, it's still not that great for Stringless. So just forget about Stringless for Yelan. Now, for more specific comparisons, please refer to earlier math guides where I've done individual weapons as well, or the table for the figures. And now I'll provide the view on the tables for pause. Okay. So here You can pause this anytime. This provides you your full comparison for the 5-star weapons as well as Sacrificial bow. At least between these 4 weapons. Now let's look at what's coming up next. We have Favonius. Okay, and its comparisons to the 4 weapons before it. We have Stringless and comparison against the 5 weapons before it. And so pause this if you want to. I'm going to move on next. We have let me see. I don't have enough space. Alright, so we have Fading Twilight here and the 6 weapons before it. How the comparison looks like. And you see a lot of red cells, or rather a lot of pink cells, so you know most of these weapons are performing better. Sorry, when you see pink cells, it means that these weapons are performing worse. And it's mainly the 5-star weapons really. But even then, this is not a great performance, yeah? There's not that big of a difference. Like Fading Twilight does better than than Sacrificial. Okay, it does better than Sacrificial. Starting from C3. But the difference is so small that you should just use Sacrificial, which is why in my recommendation I also say use Sacrificial. Alright. Now, Slingshot and the 7 weapons before it. Okay. Now Slingshot is pretty good. You'll see there are more red cells, yeah. So it's not too bad for Slingshot. You'll see for Fading Twilight versus Sackbow versus Favonius, the difference are not big. But at C0, Fading Twilight does perform a lot worse. It's only C1 plus onwards that it doesn't have too much of a difference between Sackbow and Favonius. Okay. Alright, so I hope you have done that's good enough for you to pause and refer. Let's talk about what's coming next for Yelan video series. So I have artifact comparison. Okay, all of these are done. And now we have completed 8 weapon comparison for VV Vape. Coming up next will be Taser, Vape EC, Yelan Constellation Refinement comparison, and probably the cheat sheet or summary that I said in previous videos that I wanted to do. But just to share, my baby's first year birthday is this Friday. So yeah, I may not be able to do it this Friday. Worst case scenario, I may have to do it later than that. But ideally, I do want to be able to do 1 video daily this week. Which is why if you look at the number of videos coming, right, you know that it is 1 video plan per day for that week. So anyway, let's see how that goes. And as usual, let me know in comments if there's a specific math you would like. But time is pretty tight here, so it's probably going to have to follow this video pipeline here. You can show support / appreciation via Super Thanks, which I recently unlocked, and I'll make sure to reply to every Super Thanks comment as it will be highlighted as well. Otherwise, you can also join me over at Twitch where I answer almost every question there, and this is the Twitch link, the link is in the description too. If you like the content, remember to like the video and click subscribe for more. Thanks everyone for watching. Bye.